Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Many of us struggle with sales, whether it's from confidence, comfort, or just not wanting to be salesy. We want to help our customers. We know we can, but we complicate the process. This podcast is designed to help professionals like you improve at sales through process, practice, frameworks, and thinking differently about what you already know. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I am sitting here across the table from Mike Simmons. And I do believe, Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is our first live in-person episode.
We have done a live in-person episode before.
Disney.
We did record with Dan.
That's right.
At one point, but it is our first live in front of a studio audience.
That's
episode.
true. We have a studio audience of one.
Well, you don't have to reveal that.
Oh, I wasn't supposed to?
Yeah, it was an audience. Audience is plural.
Oh, that's true. There's other people around. We are in Kansas City, Missouri at a Hilton Hotel.
Watching the Cardinals and the Chiefs play a preseason Monday Night Football game.
Yes.
Well, actually, so this must be recorded because it's not Monday night.
We are in a lounge and there are other people about. So that counts as a studio audience.
And Tanner is not giving any nonverbal feedback relative to the jokes. So they're either not funny or Tanner doesn't have a sense of humor.
Oh,
so I just revealed who our studio audience person is.
That would be Tanner Brock, who has been on this show several times.
He has.
Yeah. Okay. Well, enough about Tanner. Let's.
Well, actually, we are going to talk about Tanner because we're at his event.
Oh, that's right. Well, then start us off. I know you've got a topic in mind related to the event. So what is the event? What are we doing here? Why Kansas City? And has Mike Simmons ever been to Kansas City before? Those are questions we're going to answer on this show.
I've never been to Kansas City before. And sadly, I actually thought I was going to St. Louis right up until the point that I got to the airport and realized I was actually going to Kansas City.
So you got here and you started looking for the arch and didn't find it.
Well, actually, what happened was I got to the airport and when I looked at the flight, the St. Louis flight showed that it was departing at 3:45, which was eerily close to the time that I thought my flight was arriving in Kansas City. And then I thought something is terribly wrong. Looked at the hotel and realized that we're actually going to Kansas City. Granted, I was in the right state, just the wrong city. Anyhow, I made it.
Barely. Okay, so now we're in Kansas City, and what brought you here?
Yeah, so Tanner and Chip Huth, Chip's also been on the podcast, have a company called Changing Discourse, and they're running a Red Team event in Kansas City this week, and it has been absolutely awesome to get together with a number of business leaders, both in private and public service, who are interested in solving problems that they're running into inside their organization. And it's amazing how empowering it can be when you get around people who are struggling with problems where at some point in time, somebody else has dealt with something similar, but you never would have thought that they would have dealt with something similar. And I think a piece of feedback, and we'll get into the detail here, one piece of feedback would be, well, what are a bunch of police officers, people who are part of a SWAT team, what are they going to know about challenges that you run into in the private sector and when you're selling products to businesses? And you realize that the key connection there is each of us are dealing with human beings. These human beings have problems, and all of them are looking for solutions. And if you can take a creative approach to problem solving, it's amazing what a group of smart, committed, creative individuals can accomplish even in a really short period of time. So this has been a fascinating event for me.
When I look at the problems people are trying to work through, if you take out the details and you don't know it's law enforcement, they're either about working with people, transitioning to something, or creating something new. That's pretty much everything people are working through right now.
And what's awesome is to see the light bulb go off when they realize they're not the only one with the problem. They're not the only one who's had to deal with some kind of people problem, has gone through the process of trying to make a transition, or has gone through the process of creating something new. So it makes me wonder why we overcomplicate a lot of this stuff.
You were wondering, what do law enforcement officers have to do with trying to sell things to businesses? Do you think the law enforcement officers were thinking, what are Mike and Jody doing here? What do they know about law enforcement? Although they probably still see my swagger from being a park ranger.
They probably do. It's hard when you have a logo that has a flat hat on it, and often you bring up stories about being a park ranger. So I don't know that it's much of a leap to connect you with law enforcement, but with me, well, we're not going to get into my experience with law enforcement.
Well, you've experienced it from the other end, so it's pretty close. You can relate.
I can relate, but
they know how to handcuff. You know how to be handcuffed.
I don't recall ever being handcuffed.
Don't recall. That's the key. Yes.
Thank you. You do realize my kids listen to this. No, actually, they don't.
Well, we should move on anyway. I've got something in mind that I have learned that I think could be applied to any organization, and I'm curious to see if it's similar to what you've taken away. So let me start in that to say these officers that are here, most of the people here are tied to law enforcement in some way. There are some exceptions, but I think they've even realized after one day to say, wow, it was good to get away from my department, talk about this problem with other people, other officers, because they've probably been through it, but the surprise to talk to business people who I wouldn't have connected any of this to, and they're giving me good ideas.
Yeah. And again, I think the common denominator is people. Like in each of these instances, we've got, and you talked about it in the context of people problems, transitions that are happening. Many times those transitions are organizations are transitioning from one thing to another, or groups that are transitioning an activity from one to another, people who are trying to create things. And I think it's funny how we often get so deep into our own work that we think, wow, we're the only ones who are dealing with this. And it's this expertise that we have in the certain vertical that we operate in that gives us the power to be really successful. And the epiphanies that come out. There was one story that someone shared today, and we're all under NDA relative to the specifics that we went through. But there was one instance where a person mentioned toward the end of the day that they had gone through two additional red teaming events. And this was the first one where a certain idea had come up. And I think he joked and said it was actually a good idea that hadn't been considered. But this is one of those instances where you're like, well, when I actually surround myself with good, creative people and give them a chance to think through some challenges, it's amazing what people will come up with when they don't have their biases that they're bringing, which are the things that we all have when we focus so deeply on the things that we know really, really, really well.
So what have you learned here, in addition to what you've just told us, that applies? So let's say I'm listening to this. I work for company in Utah, and what can I do tomorrow that could be different?
Yeah, I think the big thing, and it's not really it's not an epiphany, it's not a major learning, it's more of a reinforcement. Go back to your basic tools, frameworks, and methods to help break through thinking challenges. And I know a number of people have said this, you don't solve complex problems with complex solutions. You don't solve complex problems with complex solutions. So take a simple framework, whether it's a traditional 2x2, some of the frameworks that we've talked about on the podcast before, take these frameworks and apply them to the challenge that you're dealing with and see how that helps you break through some of the challenges that you're having inside your organization. So that would be one thing. Apply traditional frameworks. It could be 2x2, could be Franklin T, could be the territory plan that we use relative to creating clarity and focus when we're talking about some of the Catalyst sale tools and frameworks. But so that would be one thing. The other one is you don't need to go outside of your organization to find people who don't have the same biases as you. Now, granted, you all have the same logo, maybe on your t-shirt or your business card, or you have the same email domain at the end of your email address. But there are some people inside your organization who focus on product. There are some people who focus on engineering. There are some people who focus on HR-related items. They all have diverse experiences. What happens when you bring them into a room and work through some of the core organization problems? It's amazing the blind spots that you'll uncover when you go through that process. So keep things simple, leverage your frameworks, and leverage your team. Those would be three things that I would absolutely start thinking about on any of the core problems you're running into inside your organization today.
That's a good thought. I was thinking how valuable it is to get out around other people outside your organization, but you're exactly right. You can accomplish the same thing within your own organization. It reminds me of when I was a park ranger, how infrequently park rangers who are out in the field seeing how visitors use the facilities actually talk to the maintenance guys who have to fix it. We didn't really talk about the problems. And let's say a maintenance guy or lady has to fix the same thing once a month, but never ask the park ranger, why does this keep breaking every month? Or the park ranger might tell the maintenance guy, gosh, this door broke again. And they just never talk about, well, how are people using it? It just, that each one has some really valuable information for the other. They're just not asking.
They're not asking, and they're not asking the simple questions. Like, what would you do? And I think there was one of the tools that we went through. And again, these are public tools that are available. It was going through the question of saying, how do you think of yourself? How do your competitors, or how does your adversary, how does your enemy, how does the person on the other end think of you? How do you think of the enemy, the adversary, the person on the other end? How do they think about themselves? And these are just simple questions that you can go through. And most organizations fall into the trap of talking about things in the context of what they do, not what they do for their customers or what challenges their customers are running into, or even how others inside the market are solving for these problems. So we create our own personal blind spots because we tend to focus on ourselves just because we're missing on some really, really simple questions. And the other thing that I thought was fascinating about today's event are the number of challenges that we were able to go through as a group. And I don't know how many people were in the room. It might have been 12 or 13. I know it was an odd number because somebody was missing a chair, but there was an odd number in there. And we went through this process of rotation, and we rotated through a number of different problems in a meeting that lasted a day, but could have gone on for another couple of hours. And I don't think anybody would have been lost in it. So this doesn't, I guess my point as I ramble through this is it doesn't have to take long, but you do need to maintain a level of focus, and you have to be really deliberate about how you approach things.
So for you personally, because you go home tomorrow, what will you do differently after this?
One of the things I'll do differently is related specifically to the discussion around one of the tools, which was a SWOT analysis. And I have been one of those leaders in an organization who would get too pedantic about how you define each area of the SWOT analysis. Is this a strength? Is it actually a weakness? Is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? And when people would put things on the board, I'd worry too much about, does it fit in this category or doesn't it fit in this category? And it was just a major breakthrough today to hear someone say, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really count. Where you categorize it is not as important as actually getting the information up on the board and then being able to think through it. So the thing I think I've been working on this for a while now, but I need to get better at it. And I'll continue to get better at it. Not be so overly focused on the vocabulary and how things get categorized, be more focused on how do we get the information out so that we can ultimately get to an end solution and be more creative in the way that we approach things. So that's something I'll do differently.
Well, Mike, it's been a treat for me to have you here. We haven't been in person in a little while, so it's good to see you again. The last time we saw each other, let's see what was going on. It was Orlando, and the world was starting to fall apart.
You beat me in miniature golf.
Oh, yeah, that happened too, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
I still hold a grudge. Not too much of a grudge, because I know I'll take it the next time. But as we were talking with some people at dinner tonight, it's usually the people who talk a big game who don't have a game. So I guess take that as you will.
That's right. Well, it's good to see you in person again, Mike. Hopefully it happens more often than it has over the last year. Do you have any closing thoughts before we go?
Stop overcomplicating things. Stop thinking that you're so uniquely different than everybody else. Go out there, have questions and discussions, have healthy discourse with others, changing discourse like Tanner and Chip's company is called, and just go out there and do good things. That was too fluffy, wasn't it?
No, I don't know. It's all right for you to be fluffy.
Well, I'll wrap it up. Why don't I take care of the cold readout instead of you doing the outro? Do you think I can do it? Do you think I could do the outro without reading it? If you know of someone who would enjoy or get value out of this podcast, please share it with them. Share it with them via LinkedIn or Twitter. Let Jody and I know. Let Tanner know. He's, again, one of the people in our studio audience. Sales is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?